I'm Lana Glowshot, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my top tips for drawing realistic flowers with colored pencils. These tips follow the process of the drawing, so if your goal is to create really polished, finished colored pencil florals, then make sure you stay all the way to the end. Tip number 1 is to apply a base layer that focuses on the local color. The local color of an object takes out of the equation the colors that are found in the very lightest and the darkest parts of a form. So when I look at these flowers, this is a yellow and pink flower. So I applied yellow and pink washes of color. I didn't focus on those shadow shapes or those really tiny details at this point. If you decide to do a base layer with watercolor, you do not need to be a watercolor pro. I certainly am not a watercolor pro. I would love to be better with this medium, but I use watercolor because it's quick and I can get a lot of color on my paper really efficiently. Then I can come back over the top with colored pencils and refine it. Tip number 2 is to pay close attention to your reference material. After your base layer is established, you'll want to come in and refine the details a bit more. Over the top of the watercolor, I came in with colored pencils, paying really close attention to the anatomy of the flower and the pattern of light. And I wanted these details to be as close as possible. These pieces that are extending out of the center of the flower are called stamens, and no one is going to notice if every single one of them is rendered perfectly. So the goal isn't to get them to be exact. The goal is to get them to have the character of the flower. I reference my photo really closely during this process, and I pay really close attention to the shapes that I see. An oversimplification of this flower will result in a really cartoony look. So if I make these a bunch of perfect spheres connected to little sticks, it's not going to be believable as a realistic flower. When I look closely, those ends are actually more rectangular and are organic and irregular in shape. So I really focus on that when I am rendering each of these. Tip number 3 is to pay attention to the light shapes. Now, light shapes are the areas that are hit by the light. And because I am working over the top of a watercolor base that covered the entire paper, I can actually add my whites or my lightest values right on top with a white colored pencil. Here I am using a Derwent drawing color pencil in Chinese white, and these colored pencils are the waxiest pencils that I have ever used. They are very opaque and they're great for laying opaque whites over the top of a colored base the way that I'm using them here. If you don't have the Derwent drawing Chinese white, there are other colored pencils that are going to do a great job laying white over the top of watercolor as well. Luminance would be my second choice, a Luminance white colored pencil, and probably Prismacolor would be my third choice. Your oily colored pencils like Polychromos are not going to work quite as well laying opaque whites over the top because they're much more transparent. Tip number 4 is to use vibrant colors in your shadows. When you are drawing flowers, the local color of the flower is typically very bright and vibrant. And if you use really desaturated colors in your shadows, it's going to take away from the beautiful vibrant color that you have established in your light shapes. So I would recommend using bold, vibrant colors in your shadows as well. As much as possible, I try to avoid using colors like gray and brown to build up my shadows. I have found that yellow is one of the most difficult colors to work with, at least for me. When I work with yellow, I'm working in a lighter value range than I am with greens or blues or reds, and there is less room for error when I'm in that lighter value range. I have also found that I need to be really creative with the colors that I select for my shadows so that they feel cohesive with the yellow form, but that they don't get too dark or desaturated. I would love to know if you also struggle with yellow and if you would benefit from an in-depth tutorial on working with yellow shapes and building up shadows with yellow. If this is a topic that you would like to see a video on in the future, be sure to tell me about it in the comments below and ask me specific questions that you would like me to answer in this video. And if you have benefited from some part of this video so far, I would love it if you nudge that like button so that the YouTube algorithm knows to share this content with other artists. Thanks so much for your support. Tip number 5 is to use solvent to blend your colors and to fill in the tooth. Whenever you work with colored pencils, you really only have so many layers until you're out of the tooth of the paper and it won't accept any more colored pencil. One way to extend the time that you have to work and to actually speed up your process is to use solvent. After I applied my base layer of watercolor and then came in and refined my details with a few layers of colored pencil, I blended with an Eco House solvent. This solvent dissolved the binder from the pigment and worked the pigment into the tooth of the paper so that I had less of that background tooth showing through and it appeared less grainy. If you are new to solvent or you would like to learn more about how to use solvent safely and effectively, then you'll definitely want to check out this video at some point. I will link it in the notes below, along with links to the solvent that I use and the other products that I used for this piece. Tip number 6 is to increase your pencil pressure as you become more confident with your colors. If you are going for that really waxy sheen and you want your piece to read more like a painting than a loose sketch or a drawing, then you're going to need to fill in the tooth of your paper and create a really consistent surface texture. I do this by burnishing. Burnishing means applying a lot of pressure with your pencil, so much so that you fill in and flatten the tooth of the paper. But I don't jump right to burnishing, or else I don't have enough space or time to explore my colors and to get it just right. I lay down layer upon layer until I get the color as close as possible. In this particular piece, I started with that loose watercolor wash. Then I came in and I mapped out the details and the light pattern on the flower. As I continue to lay down colored pencil, my colors are getting more and more accurate, and I'm getting closer and closer to that final destination. When I'm really close and my colors are right where I want them to be, I am adding a ton of pressure so that I am flattening the tooth and creating that really waxy sheen. Tip number 7 is to create clean edges but avoid outlining. In an earlier video, I showed you how I created this really blurry background, and I discussed establishing a hierarchy of edges. I reserve those hardest edges for my focal point, which for this piece is this central yellow flower, and then I allow my edges to become softer as I move into the background, with these background edges being super, super soft. When I establish a hard edge in my flower petal, I might begin with an outline, but I don't leave an outline there. I turn this outline into a shape, and I create a hard edge by having one clearly defined shape next to another. If I outline my petals to create hard edges, I am going to end up with a coloring book effect, and we don't want that because that doesn't look very realistic. So remember, avoid outlines and focus on creating hard edges by putting one shape crisply next to another shape. Tip number 8 is to focus on specific shapes. I want you to resist letting your hand draw what it thinks a petal or a flower should look like, and instead really study and focus in on your subject matter. When you look at your photo reference or the live flower in front of you, there are not going to be any two petals that are the same. And you make these petals unique and individual by focusing on the shapes that make them up. Look at the shapes that create the shadows. Look at the shapes that create the transition in light to dark or the transition between different colors. Look at the shapes that create the folds and the wrinkles in the petal. When you focus on the shapes, you are going to be able to create a more realistic colored pencil flower because you are almost drawing a unique portrait of this unique flower, much like you would draw a portrait of a person. You're looking at all the things that make that flower unique. If you need to, take it one petal at a time. Break that petal down into lots of individual shapes and draw the shapes one at a time. These 8 tips are definitely going to help you improve your colored pencil flower drawings. If you would like some additional tips, strategies, and resources for your upcoming floral drawings, consider checking out this playlist while you wait for next week's video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Now go have a beautiful and creative day. Bye!